As a skyship flies above gray, rain-filled clouds, the sun begins to set in the west. Peels of red and orange paint the sky above, and to the east, the first pinpoints of starlight were just beginning to be visible. 2 of Jam'mar's 3 moons, Gavain and Nodell, were high but separate in the evening sky. The first, a soft blue-green, while Nodell's lifeless and barren rocky surface shone a bright silver where the setting sun was not obstructed by either Jam'mar or her other moons. On this eve, however, both moons were full and bright, and when reflected off the top of the gray clouds below, the air was filled with a soft, ambient glow, more than enough for the crew and passengers to enjoy being on the deck of the craft with no problems of vision. As the sky continued its fade into night, the passengers dined and drank, taking their time to enjoy not only the meal, but of their company as well. Couples, families, as well as those looking for a getaway had booked this vessel nearly completely full, and this was not unusual for skyships bound for Polaron, that capital of entertainment and trade on Solaris's eastern edge. After dinner, most found amusement elsewhere on the vessel, leaving only a scant handful of groups on the deck as the sun finished its dip below the edge of the western sky, letting night fully set in with its stellar light show able to be taken in. The skies of Jam'mar were filled with many stars, many to which the realms have expanded in the current age. In fact, several of the groups had 1 or more people pointing here and there in the sky, naming systems and stars as well as other relevant trivia to impress their fellow passengers. Most of them were even accurate to boot. A welcome and amusing observation that Daragon Stone Shaper had come to as he watched not the wonders of the stars in the skies, but the wonders of the various groups of people on the deck. Old habits of a profession he had prided himself in had begun to re-emerge. People watching was a long-time pastime of his, but the mechanical categorization and assessment of each person looked at was something he had almost forgotten about until his companion, a young gnome, asked him what was so entrancing about the crowds he was looking at. Reshlink Tinkerstone had been a near shadow of Daragon for most of the past decade, proclaiming himself Daragon's student and protege shortly after meeting him. Despite all protestations, the gnome, who was a bit tall and wide for a gnome, features a bit too sharp. He had persevered through every banal task or skewed test that Daragon had placed before him. Resh had shown an amazing aptitude for critical thinking and investigative rigor, and for the past few years, Daragon had all but officially accepted him as his student. Resh was, by far, Daragon's closest confidant, and even as Daragon tried to slip away unbeknownst to Resh on this job, Resh simply met him at the skydock with fare already paid, as yet another example of how well he had taken the old dwarf's lessons to heart. That had been hours ago, and as they watched the sky, the people, and the crew, the two began to talk of things both relevant to the upcoming job and of things of the past. Daragon's suspicions as to Resh's lineage were confirmed, as Resh began a particularly amusing tale of his grandfather on his mother's side, a dwarf, escaping from a group of bandits he had just defended by seeking to hide amongst a group of gnomish travelers just leaving the town that he was in at the time. Of course, Resh's grandmother was among them, but it was the fact that it was a stage troupe of actors, acrobats, and other performers that made the efforts of Resh's grandfather a humorous tale, as the dwarf in question was a humble man of mines and forges, not stage and lights, so struggled with the concepts of stage makeup, with particular disdain to the idea of dyeing his hair or beard. Daragon instinctively clutched and stroked his own great silver beard, as Resh related an incident involving his grandfather's beard, some elfin curlers, and a precon, and only stopped when a twist or turn to the story would cause Daragon to deeply chuckle and laugh mirthfully. By the 9 and 4, welcome back to the library. I am the recorder, and in this entry of Intro to the Realms, we're going to answer a rather reasonable and common question made of the realms. That question being, with so many different peoples and species in the realms, from Dragwas and Crystons to elves and gnomes, how does cross-species procreation work? Perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and new guests of the library, we will begin by addressing the fact that when it comes to cross-species procreation, the members of native realms humanity, the Flameforged, are by far the most widely compatible, and demonstratively so. This is to such an extent that when someone refers to a half-something without further qualification, the unspoken lineage is almost always normally assumed to be human. This compatibility also seems to extend to the Teltechian humans on a purely biological level. However, nearly all such unions between Teltechians and others run severe risks of producing offspring that will end up becoming Sladich. This is speculated to be due to a base incompatibility between parts of the Teltechian biology, which is known to incorporate certain biotechnological features that are a part of their bloodlines and species after untold ages of gene editing and nanite augmentation, and the magical nature inherent to most of the realm's native species. Beyond a near universal compatibility shown by humanity, most of the species of the realms are capable of producing offspring with other members. However, the results are far less uniform than with humans, with some offspring expressing some traits from their dual heritage, while another, even a twin, may express a completely different combination of these traits. Typically though, height, weight, as well as body type and shape tends to be a merging of the two parent races' attributes, typically within the standard deviations of each. Hair types, colors, and patterns can also be a blend, or wholly of one line or the other. Traits and abilities tend to be a blend of both lineages. However, as stated before, this is rarely in a uniform manner. The species that are known to be more or less compatible, barring physical size conflicts, which, honestly, are a simple matter of a spell or two for those that are truly determined, and can mate with only minimal issues or complications for the child, are the following races: Bastions, Elves, Dwarves, Gnomes, Goblins, Halflings, Humans as stated, Manori, the Orckin, as well as the Rodkin. Of course, there are those species that are just incompatible with any outside their own kind, and this is almost universally due to their own particular means of reproduction. The Dragwa, for example, lay eggs that can only hatch in the caves of their home city, The Praetors are grown in biotubes from specially developed cells generated slowly over centuries. The Celestians are fully construct robotic constructs built and then imbued with an ember of a soul. While the Scale-Blessed lay eggs similar to their draconic creators. And the Draci? They procreate in a manner that is completely unknown or accepting of outsiders. Crystons and their influence on procreation is a bit harder to fit into the above, as they are in part just a biocrystic form with the lion's share of its form's natural abilities and traits. However, when it comes to procreation, crystons act as a mirror to the non-cryston partner. The most famous example of this is Damascus Skychild, god of time, space, and psionics, the son of Genevieve Nodoker, a full elf, and Corin Skychild, a cryston. And Damascus was born fully elven, with a strikingly similar physical appearance to his mother. Between two crystons, any traits that the parents have will blend normally as if they were any other offspring. Less than a day later, Daragon, Stoneshaper, and Reshlink Tinkerstone found themselves enjoying the hospitality of an old friend of Daragon, who had lived in old Polaron for far longer than even he had. Known only as Mastersmith Runescale, a dark gray, rune-covered dwarf of ancient lineage. As the flames of the forge shift and danced, causing the shadows to likewise move and swerve, the older dwarf and his guests shared both drink and humor in equal measure. Having arrived in Polaron that morning, Daragon and Resh had had a bit of a tour of the city for Resh, as it was his first time in Polaron. Resh was understandably awed by the size and scale of Jam'mar's grandest trade city, from the Colosseum to the Grand Circus of the High Quarter. And soon enough, Resh understood why Daragon chose to take his time with heading to the old city, as their matter of entry was less than official, and its preparation no doubt a second reason for many of their stops. Entering the old city via an underground path, led through various tunnels and secret corridors, they emerged at the base of the great towers of cubes and webs that made up old Polaron. The awe that Reshlink had felt looking at the mile-tall and square Colosseum was washed away as he realized that each of these cubes was at least as large, and they stretched into the sky beyond his ability to see. 17 levels of a cube each, with hundreds of feet in between each. The very scale made his head spin until they had entered a sky carriage, and his attention was instead held by Daragon, instructing him on how he was to behave when they arrived at their first proper destination. They were going to meet a dwarven half-dragon mastersmith, and there were protocols to be observed for how one was to deal with such a master craftsman, particularly when they carried the blood and power of an elder race in their veins. That, of course, leaves two prominent species of the realms, the elder races of Dragon and Analar. Of the first, being dragons, the results of a pairing are well known, and tales of dragons taking the form of other races and falling in love, with the resultant offspring often becoming the center of their own tales and legends, are many and countless over the years and across the realms. Normally, the child will be a bit taller, larger than is normal for one of their kind, and will often have wings and skin in the hue and textures reflecting their draconic heritage, as well as the chance of a scaleless, leathery hide instead of skin. Few, if any, of the non-dragon species' metaphysical talents or abilities will express themselves in these children. Those that do are generally different in some way. Often, this will be in a way that complements their draconic gifts, which are wholly based on their parents' own. They are also blessed with agelessness, staying in their peak physical forms for magnitudes of years longer than normal for one of the younger races. It should be noted, however, that half-dragons born prior to the Wars of Feather and Scale, as rare as they are, have been noted as being far more diverse in their individual form and powers, while those born after the wars, while still varied, are far more limited in that range of variance. As had been apparent quite quickly, Runescale was a man from a different age, as well as incredibly skilled in the arts of the forge and all forms of dwarven rune and crystal craft. His forge and the large home that contained it were covered in runes and decorated with works of crystal, metal, and gem that were as beautiful as they were functional and practical. The mastersmith was the one who had forged Daragon's artificial replacement for his lost eye, as was made quite clear when he removed it in a smooth flourish, almost as soon as Daragon had released the initial clasping of their arms in greeting. As Daragon more or less accepted this with resigned grumbles, Resh had nearly launched into a violent defense of his teacher. Of course, the warnings given on the way had kept his instinct in check, as did the piercing single glance the mastersmith shot him. Without Daragon's enhanced eye, only Resh was able to see the slight curl of the lip that accompanied the look of warning, and he knew to his core, if he had not restrained himself, he would have done nothing but become a stain on the floor. After performing some work on the eye, it was returned, and as Daragon relaxed, being able to see normally again, so too did Resh. That was until much later, and after many drinks, and telling several stories of his parents and the troop they had been a part of, that the mastersmith queried as to when Resh became aware of the truth of his parentage. At first the gnome appeared to not understand what the old dwarf was talking about, as he had been quite open about the fact that his grandfather had been one of the dwarven kin. Runescale, however, persisted, stating that if Resh was truly going to be Daragon's protege, he needed to be honest now, and that the deceptions of the Analar are forever a stain upon them and their progeny, requiring extraordinary levels of honesty to achieve a similar level of trust as almost any other. With Daragon's stare now fixed on him squarely, Resh sighed and began to explain how his father, who, for the entirety of Resh's life, and for at least several decades before meeting his mother and falling in love, had presented himself as a gnome in all ways, and had never revealed the fact that he was an Analar. Resh confessed that he didn't even know if his mother had been aware of the truth before they had both died in a freak quake collapsing the tunnels the troop was traveling and camped in, and Resh had been sent off to be fostered by an Analar of some note, apparently to learn what form his gifts would take, and how best to ensure that he could both control and use them effectively. With a shrug of his shoulders, Rush-linked Tinkerstone's wings began to coalesce into being, shaped from interplanar energies and matter, and shimmering like liquid metals of differing hues and tints. They were as small as he was, but he was clear that they were very functional, and he had spent many years learning how to incorporate the acrobatics of his stage life with the freedom of range his wings could provide. However, he also said he quickly came to the conclusion that in most cases, his acrobatic skills were more than enough, and his wings served to only draw attention, and often the less than welcome kind. The second elder race, the IttR, are far less known for procreation outside of their own kind. There are very few known examples of such, and for good reason it would appear. According to the few records that exist on the matter, the IttR were incapable of having children with others from some time in the Age of Elders by the decree of the Lord Protector of the IttR. Due to the IttR's power of grace as well as the might held by the Lord Protector, from that point until the change of Lord Protectors in the recent ages with the ascension of IttR to the role, such unions just never bore children or induced pregnancy. The Lord Protector of old, Thanix, created and enforced this state of being due to the example of the so-called Avatar of Luck, known as Setson, being born. Setson was the result of an IttR and an elf, and when born it was clear he had strange and unusual abilities even for the child of an elder race. More worryingly, while Setson's powers were quite limited in their scopes and all technicalities, being only able to affect the outcomes of probabilities in his personal area, as he grew, so did his area of effect and ability to consciously direct these efforts, even in the face of IttR grace attempting to counter or mitigate it. This was seen as an unacceptable risk and danger, not only for the IttR, but to the younger races as well. So repeats of such couplings bearing children was prevented to save all from the possibly disastrous effects. With the rise of IttR and the apparent lifting of this ban, a few half-IttRs are known to have been born. And much like half-dragons born in the modern ages, they seem to be far more contained, not only in their potential danger, but their variance as well. Typically, a half-IttR will be taller and far more lithe and lean in the body than the parent of the second. Wings will almost always be present, but for most, these can be dismissed or concealed at will. This, along with an inborn talent for a particular form or set of metaphysical arts, most often psionic in nature, are the most clear signs of their elder lineage. This talent is normally in a basic form of the art, and while it will grow as the person themselves do, becoming more potent with age and experience, they will rarely eclipse the ability of a dedicated practitioner of the same art. As there are only a few scant examples of half-IttR, either from the distant past or in the modern day, it is unclear whether they share the same near or immortality as the half-dragon counterparts, but it is heavily suspected to be the case, as Setson is still kicking around today. Soon after Resh's reveal and the dismissal of his wings, laughter again rang out as the mastersmith heartily congratulated the gnome for his honesty and bravery, and once more tales, rumors, and other stories were again exchanged as drink flowed once more. To Daragon's practiced ear, however, Resh laughed more deeply and freely than he had ever before, no longer weighed down by this secret. And this brought a thin smile to Daragon's lips, for he was only beginning to truly understand the depth that Resh respected and regarded him. How the old mastersmith knew of Rush's secret, Daragon was unsure. But he silently thanked the cantankerous old dwarf for his action, as Resh would no longer feel bound to hide his nature from Daragon at the expense of the gnome's safety. Soon, the volume of brew consumed began to have its effect, and Resh excused himself to bed, having been told where he could find one by the mastersmith, who was happy to have guests in his home. After the gnome had said his parting quips and wandered off, Daragon and the mastersmith began to speak in earnest about the matters of the apparently wayward elf he was hired to find. RuneScale had bad news on that matter, as the elf in question had been discovered in his estate, slain by unknown means only 3 days ago. The estate was sealed and had a standing dragon knight at its gate, with the official record stating that the investigation was open, but had no leads. Of curiosity to both of the dwarves, the estate was seen to have a string of people coming in and out before it was sealed. Far more than just investigators and other expected personnel, and the mastersmith was at loss as to the reason. Beyond the fact that several had been identified to be licensed hunters known to work closely with various powers and interests across the realms. RuneScale handed a crystal containing the sum of the information to Daragon, and inquired as to the retired investigator's next move. Daragon stood to find his way to his own room, and merely replied that he would have to report to his client, but only after he had confirmed the truth of things. The timing was way too convenient, he thought, as he had only been hired a day before the death, and while he believed coincidence was a real thing, he had never been able to trust it whenever it appeared. Even if his quarry was indeed dead, Daragon was also hired to settle any outstanding debts or affairs the elf might have had. At the very least, he would take the rest of the week to ensure that things were in order before making contact with his client, as to not waste the time of a potentially grieving client. He also silently wanted to be ready for if his client chose to have him seek justice for this now dead elf, and that required him to reacquaint himself with the old city and its ebbs and flows. If this investigation was indeed stalled right out of the gate, it was likely that things were going to be complicated and would require as much preparation as could be had if he and Resh were to succeed and survive. Perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and new guests of the library, this is where we find our protagonists. But are they on the cusp of a simple endeavor? Or are things more than they appear, as Daragon suspects? What will his client, the mysterious elf of a not insignificant reach and wealth if this retainer was anything to go by, will want Daragon to do next? Will she seek justice? To have Daragon find the killer while remaining true to the law? Or will she demand vengeance for her fallen kindred, and damned be the consequences? This is, of course, where you get to shape the story. Vote in the comments below, as well as on the poll at Gryphon'sLibrary.locals.com for one of the following 2 options, using the 3-letter abbreviation for your preferred choice. Again, please leave any comment, a line or 2 separated from your vote to make tabulation easier for me. Thank you. Now, your options. The first is Buy the Book, or BTB. Daragon's client wants justice, but can ill afford an international incident. Therefore, she will instruct Daragon to do whatever he can to find the killer or or killers without crossing the local officials or otherwise bringing attention or derision. Daragon will have to exercise care in not overstepping his bounds. Again, that is by the book, or BTB, for this option. The second, of course, is Avenge the Fallen, or ATF. The client cares not how it happens or what steps are required, only wanting to see that the responsible parties are dealt with in a decisive and final manner. Of course, Daragon is to avoid as much trouble and scrutiny as possible, so this may pit him against the very professionals he once called his co-workers, with all the entanglements that may bring. Again, that is Avenge the Fallen, or ATF, to vote for this path. Again, please place any additional questions or comments a line or two separate from your vote to make my life just that bit easier. Votes will be tallied in 2 weeks from the public release of this entry, so don't delay to making sure that your voice is heard and help me shape the story. Now, before we conclude this entry of Intro to the Realms covering Cross Species Procreation in the Realms, I want to thank you again for your time, your interest, and of course your support of the Realms of Jam'mar and Gryphon's Library. It means the world and the realms to me. Thank you. As always, I have been the Recorder, and until you next make your way back to the library for your next entry, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching.